Hi, everybody. Welcome to Module 8, Lesson 2. We're going to talk about defense and foreign policy today. We're going to be talking about, the use of conflict in diplomacy and international relations. We're going to look at the roles of the president and Congress and their roles in regards to international relations, and kind of looking at how we handle it versus other countries handle it. So our objective is basically today and our class on Wednesday to discuss U.S. foreign policy, our objectives, and our actions. So while I am speaking, if you guys would open up your Module 8, Lesson 2 course arc, and Module 8, Lesson 2 notebook, get those open so that we can go through them. And I'm going to talk about what's closing while you guys are opening that, and then we'll get started. So Module 7, the assessment will close tomorrow. Remember, that's a summative. The Module 7 project will close on Wednesday, the 1st. The Module 8 Lesson 2 that we are working on today will also be closing on the 1st. And then the Module 8 Lesson 1 from last week that we did Wednesday and Thursday closes this coming Friday as well. And then, of course, tomorrow will be Tuesday, so we have our attendance assignment and our small group meet, which is tomorrow afternoon from 12:30 to 3. So hopefully you guys have your course arcs open and your notebooks open, and you guys are ready to get this done. So let's look at our objectives, describe foreign policy, our objectives and our actions, discuss our current goals for our foreign policy, and to summarize structure and purpose of the United States military policy. Okay. So the first thing that we always do when we get into our notebooks is we look at our introduction. And of course, we have the new diplomacy, or the big stick diplomacy by Teddy Roosevelt, right? Walk softly, carry a big stick. So since the founding of the United States, foreign policy, we've really kind of wavered back and forth between isolationism, like we're going to take care of us and you all take care of you, or, well, next thing is, this is our hemisphere, the Western hemisphere, and, the rest of y'all need to stay out of our area. So, we'll just take care of our backyard and you guys take care of your stuff over there. And then, moving further into the Red Scare and the fear of communism and domino theory. And oh my gosh, if we don't jump out there and get involved, who's going to save the world? Who is going to make us a democratic globe, if you will? Why are we doing this? Well, because we have threats to security coming from everywhere, other countries, as well as terrorist organizations. And so, we see stuff on the news, and you need to understand what's going on and what is being said in the news and what's real, what's maybe not 100% the truth, etc. So our central question that you're going to be answering at the end of the notebook is, what is the United States presence on the global stage? And so, of course, you're going to highlight that, Control C, and then we come over here to our notebook, and then we literally put this in and we put Control V. What is the United States presence on the global stage? And question number 1 is done. The next part of this is our vocabulary. Remember, you have to come up with the context clues, which we can use the back of the cards that I'm going to go over, or when we do the matching, and then your own definition in the right-hand column. So looking at our rubric, remember, central question is written fully. Well, if you copy and paste it, you're perfect. Vocabulary words, all 5 words are there with self-created definition. I don't want to see a Google definition. That's not your words, okay? When we get to the Department of State, learn Department of State, you're going to choose 2 policy issues, and then you're going to explain what they are in complete sentences. When we go to the next, learn Department of Defense, you're going to explain in 2 full paragraphs using your thoughts on the question that is posed. And then today we're going to get through learn aid and alliances, and you'll select a peacekeeping mission from NATO or the United Nations, we'll see, and fill in the chart there. For your international organizations, you're going to list 3 countries that have joined the United Nations and the year that they joined, and I'm giving you a whole big list. Our Google Maps, as always, all 5 spots need to be used, and they need to have 1 to 2 sentences that summarize what it is about. Our journal, at least 2 full paragraphs that use and answer the question being asked, and then finally 1 full paragraph answering the essential question that we just added to our notebook. All right, so let's go to the course arc, and we will start with vocabulary. Now, remember, this is day 1, so we're only going to go, I think, through aid and alliances on here, and then we will finish up the rest because there's a lot there for day 2. All right, so we're looking at the U.S. Navy Petty Officer right here. He is literally working on like hurricane and tsunami cleanup on a base in Japan. So as we're looking at our vocabulary, we're going to be looking at people who are working abroad, okay? So our first word is dignitary, and if we flip the card, we have our context clue. The Secretary of State is the head of the department and represents the United States when traveling to other countries to meet with foreign dignitaries. A dignitary is a representative of that country, like an official representative, okay? And that's what we're looking at there. Our next word, let me go to that, is foreign affairs. Okay, so foreign meaning anything outside of our borders, right? So originally named the Department of Foreign Affairs. The department was created by the Articles of Confederation in 1788, and then later again under the Constitution as the first major branch in the executive. That is why when we look at the people who fall in order, if something were to happen to the president, Secretary of State always follows after the elected representatives, right? President, vice president, Speaker of the House, President pro tempore of the state, and then Secretary of State is underneath that because it was the first cabinet position and department actually created. Our next word is right of legation. Under international law, each country has the right of legation, and the United States has had a foreign service representative since the Second Continental Congress in 1778. So if we're talking about Benjamin Franklin, and basically the right of legation is a right to send and receive foreign dignities or foreign diplomats or ambassadors, whatever you want to call them, okay? Our next word on here is embassy. And there are over 180 American embassies around the world. An embassy is like the official residence and office of an ambassador in another country. And where an embassy stand actually basically takes on the land that it sits on, especially it becomes the land of the country of that embassy. So American embassies are actually guarded by Marine Corps. And once you walk past the gate, if they allow you into the embassy, you are like officially on American soil unless or until a country revokes that ability to have that. The next word is ambassador. Today, an ambassador is selected by the president to represent the United States in all countries recognized by America. We send people over to other countries. They send people here, okay? And that's it for the vocabulary. Now, again, you could have used the back of those cards for your context clue or not. That is completely up to you as to whether or not, you know, that's what you wanted to do. Or you can use the definitions, context clues that we're about to do on the matching portion. So the first one, it says, it is customary for the president to meet with a blank because one job responsibility is chief diplomat. So we know that word would be dignitary, right? So we can do where we drag and drop. The president gets to say, have a say in how their blank is to be carried out. We can also do the drop down and we can say foreign affairs. That is the policy that we make outside of our borders. Domestic would be inside. The president has the blank, the right to send and receive diplomatic representatives. That's the right of legation. The United States has established a blank in a country it has a working relationship with, and that would be an embassy, offices, and residency. And the president appoints an ambassador to be an official representative to the United States and countries around the world. So hopefully you have that completed on your course arc. And now we're going to move over to our notebook. Now remember, I also said you can highlight and then Control C for copy, and then come over here and then Control V for paste, right? And there's your context clues. On the right-hand side, remember it says you have to have it in your own words, not Google. So a dignitary, a head of state, or a diplomat from other countries. A foreign affairs, international relations with other countries. The right of legation, the right to send and receive foreign diplomats. An embassy, the official residence and offices of an ambassador. An ambassador, person sent to officially represent their country. So I used the matching on the course arc as my context clues, and then I put my own definition in my own words on the right-hand side, like it tells you to do in the rubric. These are, again, remember, the course arc questions go into the question bank. So we are seeing the first questions that could possibly be on your Module 8 Lesson 2 review with the vocabulary here. So hopefully everybody has that completed on their notebook. Let's go back to the course arc, and we're going to click on Learn Department of State. So when we're talking about the Department of State, unlike domestic and economic policy, the president and the executive branch really plays a leading role in shaping foreign policy. Whatever the president wants, the Secretary of State follows through with it, if you will. Presidents have a say in how their foreign policy will be carried out. The Secretary of State, gives advice as well as other positions within the cabinet. But really, the Secretary of State is like the president's go-to when we're talking foreign policy with other nations. Under international law, each country has the right of legation, and the United States has had foreign service representatives since the Second Continental Congress. And so what we have here is like just kind of a PowerPoint, if you will, a slide projection of important secretaries of state. So we know Thomas Jefferson, our very first one. He actually was in President Washington's cabinet, definitely close ties with France. Him and Alexander Hamilton had issues, so he resigned, and then he's going to come back as our third president. The next one, our very first woman Secretary of State, was Madeleine Albright. She was nominated and brought on by President Clinton in 1997. She was unanimously confirmed by the United States Senate and served until 2001. A very smart woman, very no nonsense, but definitely knew how to talk to other nations, even those who did not like talking to women. The first African-American Secretary of State was Colin Powell. He was a retired four-star general in the U.S. Army. He was selected by President George W. Bush during his first term. And he had a definitely different approach. Being former military, he tended to be a little bit more no nonsense, a little bit more blunt in how he dealt with things. And then some recent secretaries of state. So we have like Condoleezza Rice under President George W. Bush, Hillary Clinton under President Obama, John Kerry under President Obama, Mike Pompeo under President Trump, and then Anthony Blinken currently under President Biden. Okay, and those are just some, some key and notable secretaries of state. We don't have any questions to answer in our course arc, but we do have something to answer in our notebook. So again, let's go back to our rubric. And it says under Secretary of State, we need to do 2 policy issues that are filled out completely with at least 4 sentences. So we go to our notebook, and right here, it's a hyperlink. Remember, you click on the blue link. It says 2 policy issues that the Department of State is currently focused on. You'll need to click on policy issues to find ones that interest you. give a brief explanation on what the department is focused on and what they are doing to see it through. So you click on here, click on the link. It's going to redirect us to the anti-corruption and transparency policy issues. That's where it wants us to go. And so you just look, you can talk about the Bureau of International Narcotics, the Bureau of Economic and Business Affairs. You click on each of these and you can find more about what they are actually doing within those bureaus, okay? So going back to our notebook. So the two I picked, curbing illicit finance, because that is a big issue going on right now, talking about, trying to keep people from like using ill-gotten cash, trying to keep laundering from happening, but it's gotten a very, it's had some negativity because of the $500 any cash in or out of an account, which really, most people deposit $500 like with a paycheck, and now we have heavy government regulation and oversight over regular citizens and not the people that actually say that they're trying to follow, right? But curbing illicit finance is a policy issue. What is being done? Talking about transparency regulations, trying to find people who are trying to hide behind corporate structures, regulating or creating regulations, targeting real estate, etc. The second policy issue is improving diplomatic engagement and leveraging foreign assistance resources to achieve anti-corruption policy goals. That's a mouthful. Reviewing and evaluating criteria for government-to-government assistance, us helping other governments, being transparent, having accountability, bolstering public sector anti-corruption capacity. I'm not sure what exactly that means. Talking about independent auditing and oversight institutions, okay? So there's my two policy issues, and I have given you at least 4 complete sentences, which means I meet the requirement on the rubric for the Department of State portion. The next one that we are going to go to in our course arc is the Department of Defense. We'll click on that link. We've got a picture of the Pentagon here, which houses the U.S. military. The Department of Defense has basically been given the responsibility of defending the country against aggression and using military forces necessary to fend off war. So the Department of Defense handles all of our active duty military, whether it be missions they're completing, each of the branches of the military, anything military currently being talked about, okay, including the military budget, which we will talk about. Foreign policy, we know the U.S. military has maintained bases all around the world. Having a strong military has been the idea to deter or discourage other countries from attacking us, especially if we have a military base in their backyard. That kind of idea. President George W. Bush expanded the belief of maintaining a strong military force, basically to a policy of preemptive war. This came after September 11th in 2001, where a separate budget for war was established in the federal budget, and the country has held to the policy of conducting war with anyone it believes to pose a threat. Once we got hit on our soil, much like Pearl Harbor, the thought process was never again, it's not going to happen. So we do have a crash course video on foreign policy. I'm going to play that. I'm going to mute my microphone and play that for you. Then we'll answer the questions and we'll go to our notebook.
Hello, I'm Craig, and this is Crash Course Government and Politics, and congratulations, you have made it to the final Crash Course Government and Politics video! Woo! Today we're going to look at the mystifying paradox of both the least and most important aspect of government, foreign policy. Foreign policy is the most important because it has potential to affect the largest number of people, especially if you include environmental policy, which we should. Also, foreign policy includes a lot of elements of economic policy, so that's important. But it's also the least important. First, because it tends to have a minimal impact on how Americans think about their government, unless the US is at war, and even then, not always so much. And second, because it's the least democratic government policy, which might be a good thing. Foreign policy is a collection of policies that determine America's relations with other nations and foreign entities. It includes diplomacy, military and security policy, international human rights policies, economic policies such as trade and international energy policy, and environmental policy. My environmental policy is that. In some ways, foreign policy is the quintessential public good. Everybody benefits from a policy that makes citizens and the world safer, and no individual, except for maybe a Bond-style supervillain, could pull it off by themselves. Like all government policy, foreign policy has goals. Of course, foreign policy is about providing security, but American foreign policy also seeks to create prosperity and works towards a somewhat idealistic goal of making the world a better place. Security has many facets, and like most things, it has grown more complex over time. It used to simply mean being able to repel invaders. No, not the Mongols, more like the British. Now, however, in addition to physical security, foreign policy encompasses transportation, energy, cybersecurity, and food security. So we can see how foreign policy and economic policy are closely related. And of course, we can't forget terrorism. I can't resist a little history here, especially since this is the last episode of the series. From the beginning, starting with George Washington, in terms of physical security, the US has been pretty isolationist, although Canadians and Mexicans would probably disagree. George Washington urged the US to avoid foreign entanglements, and we basically did right up until World Wars I and II, when threats to the international order were seen as detrimental to American security, even though there wasn't much danger of the Germans invading the US. After World War II, the advent of long-range bombers and then ICBMs meant that there was a threat to Americans in America, and security policy developed into one of deterrence, which meant building up enough military strength to discourage potential enemies, pronounced Soviet Union, from attacking us. Deterrence was expensive and required a large arsenal of dangerous weapons and a willingness to fight, which the US did in Korea and Vietnam. We still maintain an enormous nuclear arsenal, but nowadays, different security threats mean deterrence is less important. It's not clear that a gigantic nuclear threat has much effect on terrorists, and since 2001, America has pursued a global war on terror that, as we saw in Iraq, includes the doctrine of preemptive war to forestall potential threats. Although military force may be the most visible form of US foreign policy, it might not be the most useful. For one thing, it's generally seen as a last resort, which I'd say is a good thing. It also has significant downsides, including costs, both in terms of lives and money. It's also politically dangerous because while Americans are usually on board with short, decisive, and victorious military action, the longer a war drags on, the less support it tends to have. The main economic goals of foreign policy are to expand opportunities for the US, promote foreign investment, maintain access to foreign energy supplies, and promote trade policies that will keep prices low at American big box stores. What this means in practice is that the US maintains an active role in international organizations like the World Trade Organization that make and uphold free trade rules. We grant most favorable nation status to trading partners that agree to low tariffs, and most notably we engage in regional trade agreements like NAFTA. The third goal of foreign policy is to make the world a better place. One way that the US does this is through international human rights initiatives. The US is a party to many human rights treaties, but we have a somewhat complicated relationship with the UN and international lawmaking bodies, so we don't sign on to all of them. For example, the US hasn't signed on to the International Criminal Court, probably because we're afraid that submitting to its jurisdiction would be a loss of our sovereignty. But in reality, international law isn't a huge part of American foreign policy. The US also engages in international peacekeeping missions, and international peace certainly makes the world a better place. America doesn't usually commit its soldiers to UN peacekeeping missions, preferring to make its own coalitions or work through NATO, which by the way is an example of international security agreement too. See, there's a lot of overlap here. Another way the US makes the world a better place is through international environmental policy. Again, that's my environmental policy. Keep eagles away from me. Environmental policy has a domestic component, as when we set fuel standards or rules for power plant emissions or dumping toxic chemicals. But since we're all on one planet with one environment, it's also part of foreign policy. Talk to me when you live on Mars. Then maybe you don't have to worry about this stuff. On the other hand, the US lags behind other nations in terms of participation in many global environmental initiatives, which is a bit of a problem considering we're one of the world's biggest polluters and producers of greenhouse gases. I can't imagine these statements are going to lead to any bad comments at all. When it comes to the conflict between environmental protection and economic growth, Americans tend to choose economic growth. So overall, in terms of foreign policy goals, security comes first, economics second, and making the world a better place, definitely third, at least in terms of formal foreign policy. This brings us to the question of how foreign policy is made, and why foreign policy is the least democratic type of policy the government makes. Let's go to the final thought bubble for Crash Course Government and Politics. Woo! At the top of the foreign policy picture is the president, who the Constitution suggests is the nation's chief diplomat, having the power to receive foreign ambassadors and negotiate treaties. The president gets all the face-to-face meetings with foreign leaders and has authority to hammer out agreements. Remember that when the Constitution was written, most other countries were still ruled by kings, emperors, and sultans, so we needed a single person to do the negotiating. He also has the advantage of being the decider on crucial issues, which may be good or bad depending on whether or not you like his decisions. But the president, like John Green, is only one man, so most of the day-to-day work of foreign policy is regulated to bureaucrats. Like most of the day-to-day work of Crash Course is relegated to bureaucrats like me, and Stan, and Zulea, and Raul, and Brandon, and Thought Cafe. Okay, this isn't the credits, let's move on. Diplomatic work is handled mainly by the State Department, but they get a lot of help from the Defense Department and the intelligence gathering agencies like the CIA, NSA, and DHS. After all, you want to have as much information as you can before you sit down at the table to negotiate, unless you're negotiating the size and shape of the table, which has happened. Congress has a role in foreign policy, but it's a limited one, and that's probably a good thing. The Senate has the constitutional power to ratify treaties, but since a two-thirds vote is required, the president will often try to create foreign policy with executive agreements that only require a majority vote in both houses, which is usually easier to secure, especially recently. One way Congress has a big role to play in foreign policy is through its power of the purse. It takes money to pursue a policy, and it takes a purse to hold money. And especially in the area of defense, Congress appropriates.
So hopefully what you're getting is both the president and Congress do have roles in foreign policy, but how they handle it and what exactly their roles are completely different. The president sets the foreign policy, but it's up to Congress to pay for that foreign policy, is what they're trying to get at.
It's a lot of it. Money, not purses. Contrary to popular belief, though, Congress hasn't budgeted a lot of money for other types of foreign policy, especially aid to foreign nations. Thanks, Thought Bubble. I miss you. Congressional committees, like those on foreign relations, can provide some expertise, but not as much as bureaucracies, because congressmen still have to spend a lot of time running for re-election, and usually those elections don't hinge on their knowledge of foreign affairs. They can also try to limit the executive branch's authority through hearings, like the one that targeted the State Department's handling of the Benghazi incident, but these don't usually affect business as usual at the bureaucracy, although they may force a few resignations. Congress at times does try to assert a foreign policy power, like it recently did with Iran's nuclear deal. But it takes a hot-button issue like Iranian nuclear weapons to garner enough public attention for Congress to wade into foreign policy like this, and I think there's a good argument that they should stay out and leave it to experts. Like me. I'm real good at Iranian nuclear weapons dealing. For the State Department and the President to work directly with other countries, those countries need to be confident that the deals they hammer out won't be undercut by Congress. Fewer actors in this arena helps build predictability, which is something you want, especially when nuclear weapons are on the table, no matter the table size or shape. Interest groups can play a role in foreign policy in terms of shaping the agenda, but they don't do much of the work of crafting the policies themselves. As with domestic policy, interest groups are most effective when they're focused on a single issue, especially if that issue is narrow. Industry interests can lobby, sometimes vigorously, for trade deals, and labor groups often lobby against them. Since foreign policy often involves foreign nations, you tend to find ethnically based interest groups that can often lobby very vocally, as some Irish Americans did during the 1980s. Interest groups that coalesce around issues have been growing in importance, especially as communication technologies enable them to get their message to a wider audience, and to organize grassroots lobbying efforts. In general, environmental groups are more effective at organizing demonstrations, and human rights groups are more effective at lobbying, but especially in the environmental arena, it's difficult to see where their efforts have caused major policy shifts. Because there aren't that many foreign policy bureaucrats, it should be easy for lobbyists to influence them, but the president, who's often the last word on foreign policy, is kind of difficult to lobby. He's a busy guy. There's a lot more to say about foreign policy, but this is a good place to stop because I've mentioned the structural aspects of foreign policy, the branches of government and how they make it, and some of the political elements that can influence it. And we'll talk about more of it in a later episode. No, we won't. This is the last episode. Foreign policy affects all Americans in ways that other policies don't. And at least as far as security policy goes, keeping Americans safe from external threats is one thing that almost all Americans from both ends of the spectrum agree on. I hope this series on American government and politics provided you with a little bit of understanding about the way the U.S. works, and that it encourages everyone to participate in the political process, wherever you live. Except for you, you stupid eagle. Oh! Oh! Crash Course Government and Politics is...
All right, so what have I been telling you guys? I want you guys to participate. If you want to see changes, you need to be involved in it. And of course, as the last video of this series that he put on, it was great to see the eagle, punch him back. All right, so let's do our questions right here. And then we will go to our notebook, and I think we might be finishing that here just momentarily, and then we'll finish up the next on Wednesday. So the armed forces are under the control of the Department of War, Homeland Security, Defense, or State. Well, we know that's Department of Defense because it's military, right? What are the reasons why the United States maintains military bases around the world? Well, we want a strong military presence to discourage being taunted or attacked. Collective security kind of maintains global peace is the thought process there. Basically, the World War II forced the world to shift to an international stance where everyone starts working together, but not really everyone, right? We kind of have two major groups. And then the United States keeps tab on every country by maintaining a military base in their country. We can't have a base in every single country. So while we would like to, we don't necessarily have that, right? All right, so let's go to the next one. The United States has maintained a policy of preemptive war since September 11th, 2001 to protect the country from anyone posing a threat. Preemptive war means the basically the ability to strike first on another country. And I think that's pretty much where we're looking at on the preemptive war, if you will. So now we're going to move over to our notebook. Let's look at the rubric. Again, for the Department of Defense, it says we need to have at minimum 2 full paragraphs in order to get all of the what is the word I'm looking for, to get all of our full points on that. So let's go to our notebook. So for the Department of Defense, it says review the money spent on the budget each year from the military. Consider whether you think it is necessary to spend that money to maintain the nation's military program. Explain in 2 paragraphs minimum, right? Explain in 2 paragraphs minimum your thoughts and facts from the lesson. So the way I broke it up is paragraph 1, think about the budget, right? The defense budget is not only for the military and is broken down even further. Personnel, weapons, research, nuclear, construction. Roughly 20% is spent on defense, but less than 1% of that is on personnel. The same percentage spent on defense is spent on Social Security, but even less than what is spent on Medicaid. For paragraph 2, after looking at where the money is spent, do you agree with that or not? Why? What would you do differently? And what would you do the same? And let's come back to our course arc. And I realized that it says that this is the correct answer for one of them. World War II forced the world to shift to an international stance where everyone works together. I think that's too simplistic, but we're going to go with it because, again, we're part of the course arc, which is your questions that show up on your question bank for the quiz. When you come back up here, it talks about the military budget. So you have your blue hyperlink. You click on this link, and it takes you to America's staggering defense budget. And it literally takes you through all of it. This is what you are going to use to answer your question in your notebook for question number 4. If you look here, defense and international security assistance is 20%. Social Security is 20%. Medicare and Medicaid and CHIP is 21%. Safety net programs, 13%. Interest paid on debt, mostly that we owe to China, 6%. And then the remaining program areas are split amongst these areas, right? And then you look at it and it tells you how much we have spent in fiscal year 2013. And it talks about weapons procurement, operations, etc. This tells you research and development, personnel, operations, nuclear programs, construction, other, how much is spent and on what, okay? So this article, which when you are in the course arc, it's the blue hyperlink right here that you're clicking on. That is what you are going to use to answer this question on the Department of Defense. And I think we're going to stop here for now. And then when we come back on Wednesday, we will finish up the rest of the course arc and the questions in here. So we will be talking about aid and alliances, which is question 5. International organizations, which is question 6. We'll do our Google Map tours, question 7. We'll discuss your journal entry, which is question 8. And of course, the response for the answer to your essential question, which is question number 9. And so that is all we are going to do for today in this video. Again, a quick reminder, tomorrow is Tuesday, so small group meets will be in the afternoon. You will have an attendance assignment. You'll get your remind text message. An announcement, of course, will be on our homepage as always. Your Module 7 assessment will close tomorrow as well. Your Module 7 project closes on Wednesday. Your Module 8 Lesson 1 closes this coming Friday. And this particular lesson that we have started today, Module 8 Lesson 2, will be closing on Wednesday as well. And I think we are done for the day. I hope you have a good rest of your day, and I will see you in class tomorrow. Bye, everybody.